for me, it's acknowledging like I'm having normal competitive feelings. Like it is okay to not feel like Mother Teresa towards every other woman on the start line. And that's okay. That's not bad. Doesn't make me a bad feminist. Doesn't make me a bad woman. Doesn't make me a bad competitor. And I think, like you said, you have to acknowledge, here's how I feel. Here's how I'm going to act in alignment with my values, because how I feel isn't always going to be the same thing as where my values are. But if you don't acknowledge, here's how I feel, I actually think that makes it much harder to like actually act in accordance with your values.
Yo. Hey, man.
Cool. Well, Zoe Rom, welcome to the BeRad podcast. I'm your host, Kat. It's so fun to have a friend on.
Yeah, I'm so psyched to be here. I feel like we talk a lot about really cool, fun, interesting stuff.
I know. I agree. And like, I really appreciate how both of us are in the industry, but very few of our conversations revolve around running.
Yeah.
Unless we go through like a crazy experience like the Mexico UTMB, then we are all about it.
Conversations are either with us very specific or very broad. Like every time we've gone on a run, I don't think we talk about running like ever.
I know. Maybe for like
too
5
many
seconds.
other things.
Yeah, it's like, should we go this direction?
Left or right?
Yeah, left or right, and that's about the extent of it. But I asked this question with all my guests, and I'm wondering if it's ever going to become redundant. But I'm wondering how you would describe yourself to a community member.
Ooh, writer and runner.
Writer and runner.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like your role in this community is maybe greater than that, though. I don't think it would encompass that, tell me about your development in Trail Runner magazine and where you're at now.
Yeah, so I got into Trail Runner because I needed a career shift out of a more traditional journalistic newsroom at NPR, and I was looking for a better work-life balance, and a friend recommended I apply for the job at Trail Runner. And so I started as assistant editor there, and since then I've worked my way up to editor-in-chief, and I'm now managing editor at Women's Running and an editor at Outside Run. So kind of taking on the management of several different cohabitating brands, which is really cool and exciting. I think that really speaks to the growth we're seeing in the sport of trail running specifically, and then running more broadly too. It's been a really exciting time to kind of enter into the media space because things are just growing so fast. A lot of money is coming into the sport, and I feel like that makes my job and our job collectively as watchdogs or as like thought leaders or people trying to ask questions and start important conversations even more critical.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned a lot of money coming into the sport and making your job much more high level, and I think that's amazing. And I'm just, and tell me if this is inappropriate to ask, but there's been a lot of layoffs outside in general. And this, I know I have a lot of friends outside of you that work at Outside, and it's been tough. And do you think that has been reactive at all, or do you think, what are your thoughts on
I
that?
think mostly what it's in response to is kind of looking down the pipeline of how the economy looks in the next 6 months to a year. Advertising spending is down across like every category. I think the positives that I can focus on are that actually advertising spending in the run space is consistent, if not up. Yeah. So again, like when you're seeing where brands are putting their money, like I don't want to single out other brands specifically that are underperforming, but running is performing. Yeah. Running brands or even like non-endemic advertisers are still investing their money into the run and into the endurance space, which is good job security, but also just exciting to see. And I feel like running as a sport, particularly trail running, is pretty recession proof. Like even when, ski passes get more expensive, and not to say that like running shouldn't be more accessible and cheaper. I'm always going to advocate for that, but it remains the most democratic and the most accessible among sports. And I think that really appeals to advertisers who want to reach either a specific audience or a really broad audience. And so we're seeing advertising spending doing pretty okay in the run space. And actually, our brands weren't affected by the most recent layoffs 2 weeks ago or the ones in May, thankfully. Though, I really feel for my colleagues that were laid off. I think it really speaks to the work that the team that I work with has been doing.
Solid.
Yeah, super solid and kind of right place, right time as well. Like, it's not just that we, have been working hard. We've been working hard in a sector of the industry that I just don't think is going to see as big a hit.
Yeah, that's great insight, because when I was thinking about you and everyone at outside, my life is so consumed with running that I didn't even think about all of the other, skiing. You're right. That's such an expensive sport.
Yeah.
And cycling, and you're right. It is running, you need a pair of shoes.
Yeah. Cycling, some of the cycling brands were the ones that saw some of the most layoffs. And that's not because those people don't work hard, but they do. But the running category, we've been such a small team the whole time. We have 3 magazines, Women's Running, Trail Runner, and Outside Runner, 3 brands, however you want to think about it in this digital first world where we don't actually make a magazine anymore, and 3 people, essentially. So it's a pretty small, slim team. We get a lot done. And I think that is protective as well.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. In your, life, it's heavily skewed towards running.
Yes.
You write about running all day. You coach, what is it, 50 athletes or something?
Like 40-ish.
Yeah, 40-ish athletes. Which is a wild number. I cap out at 25 and I'm like, I can't.
Yeah, they've been with me for a while, which is so cool. I'm sure you get to see
amazing.
the same thing. And it's been a journey. And like when I took on additional duties at Women's Running, I reached out to everyone who was like, my bandwidth may change a little bit. Who's along for the ride? And I was really pleased that 99% were.
Yeah. And that's amazing, developing those relationships that take time to curate.
Takes time.
And, but what is it like having your life so skewed in that direction? And how do you cope with having, running be essentially take up so much bandwidth in your space?
I think it's a challenge for sure. And when things are clicky, they're really clicky and it feels like everything's going right. And that's awesome.
You mean
and
when
great.
they're clicking?
Yeah. Like when I feel like my training is going well, I also feel like my writing is going well. And I feel like these things kind of feed each other. That also means there's moments where the training either isn't going well, maybe it's not even happening because I'm injured or just need to take time off, and then it sometimes feels kind of like dominoes falling.
Yeah.
And that's been tough because I think historically I have kind of overinvested in that identity as like the runner, right? Like I've had, either bad moments in training or a bad race. Like after I DNF'd Western States, it was not that awesome to show up for work at Trail Runner magazine like the next day.
Yeah.
Like, not that fun to be on Zoom calls and have everyone know and have like pretty real context for what I had just been through.
Yeah.
And it made me wish I just like worked at like, I don't know, Starbucks and I could just like sling coffee all day and not talk about it and like not feel consistently reminded of something that I still felt like emotionally like I need to process this, not at work, not like with my work identity. And that's definitely a challenge, but I've been really trying to increasingly invest in other parts of my identity. And it's tough because like I do love running and I do care about it. And the people that I care about most in my life a lot of times are also runners. And so that's like a way that we will really connect. And I wish I had a better answer, but I think I just have to really force myself to invest in other things. And I think a challenge for me is a lot of the things that I really enjoy outside of running are like things like reading, watching movies. Those are pretty personal and individual. And it's harder to like connect with a stranger about just a book I've read than it is running, which is much broader than a specific
I'm
thing.
the same way. And I find that those hobbies, I really have to intentionally put time into because otherwise they don't happen. And, it's feels so selfish and also kind of sad sometimes to be like, I really want to watch this show.
But I think it's so like even silly. Like I think, well, actually, they're not, like I don't want to minimize it, but I think that really cultivating those parts of myself that just have nothing to do with running, even though they might seem like my TV watching self, like my hanging out with my dog self, like those are really important and valid parts of my identity and all our identities. And it's tough to really intentionally lean into them when everything about what we're doing, the industry we're in, like a lot of the relationships we have, and this isn't bad, but they do kind of like overemphasize the running thing.
Yeah. And it's crazy because not only, I feel like my life is unbalanced and that so much of it is running, and I love it and I feel fulfilled.
I love feeling unbalanced. It's definitely
exactly.
There's times where I dislike it and I regret it, but I also love it.
And it's crazy and but I'm just doing it for myself, and I have and I coach athletes too, and that just because I love my athletes so much, it feels selfish in some ways. But for you are writing and reporting on the feats of often your competitors, and how do you stay in your lane as an editor when you do that and a writer, because I would have a tough time with that personally.
Yeah. Actually, so for a specific example, when we were doing the Trail Runner magazine preview of the Western States Elite Field, I just recused myself from the editorial process entirely. And like, thankfully we have the guardrails that I can still have multiple people fact check and edit those things. But like, I'm competing in that race. Therefore, I'm not an unbiased assessor of like what the elite field is. Like I would, and I love that we have the system that supports me being able to make those ethical decisions. But I think it just comes down to a lot of my like early training as a journalist at NPR of like really trying to have like strong boundaries. Because I think like so often in our industry, things get muddled and blurry. And I don't think I don't have any examples of, I think, people really profoundly violating that. But I think for me, really leaning into my own like strong sense of journalistic ethics is important. But like it's tough. Like, you know, like I had to prevent myself, like not only did I feel like I wouldn't be able to show up fully as an objective journalist if I was writing about Western states in that way, it would also not be great for my athlete brain to have to read like a list of like the 10 women and like all the cool like great, love that, want to celebrate that, but in that space I'm not ready to approach it with like the love and dignity I want to give them. So I'm going to do that when I'm emotionally ready to
totally
be there, you know.
I want to dig into this a little bit, and I know I said we weren't going to talk that much about running, but I think this is super important and overlooked, especially in women's running, and often not only overlooked, but almost women aren't honest about how they're really feeling when they're lining up with other women. And I think all of us want to be the super supportive friend at every single start line, and I want to be that.
Yeah.
And personally, I struggle sometimes.
I think so often there's this pressure, like, because historically we haven't always centered women's stories and feelings, there's been this pressure that to be a woman, you need to show up perfectly. You have to be the perfect cheerleader for yourself and embody feminist confidence and also cheer for everyone unconditionally. That's not what it's like to show up as a human, in my experience. It's much more nuanced. There's a lot of gray area. And I think it comes down to like knowing the kind of person you want to be and setting the boundaries. Like, if I'm not ready to cheer for the person the way they deserve to be cheered for, I'm going to do what I need to do to either get there or like remove myself from that scenario, you know? And
I have two questions, because you can't remove yourself from the scenario as someone who reports on these outcomes. You know, how do you, I'm curious on how you cope with that. As a person, as a human, like what are your coping mechanisms? What's your skills? And I want to know like how, like an honest evaluation of how that feels. And then I also want to know like what you see in the industry and how maybe we can improve as an industry as a whole to address some of these things.
Yeah. Well, I think the second part of that, getting more women's voices, like having two women talk on a podcast might seem like a small thing. It's actually really, like 10 years ago, how many times were just women talking about running? Yeah, 5 years ago. Just being honest and like expanding the space for women's voices to honestly tell women's stories and not putting that pressure on women to be perfect, good ambassadors of the sport. I think it's like totally normal to be an imperfect ambassador of the sport. And I think that men have been allowed to be imperfect ambassadors of the sport. And I'd love to see people from non-dominant genders be able to espouse that same freedom. Because that's what it is to be human, is to be imperfect. And so bringing more women into the storytelling space, getting more women behind the microphone, behind the camera, behind the computer screen is an important way of doing that. Because like the more women showing up imperfectly in these kind of like in the megaphone spot, that just makes it, that normalizes being normal. And I think that like so much of, just because so little of our media focuses on women and, you know, people from marginalized backgrounds, that when we do focus on women and these other folks, you're forced to be like a token, like a perfect representative of an entire group of people. Whereas like you never see a video about Jim Walmsley and assume he's standing in for all men. You know?
Exactly.
So not allowing women to just be themselves, just be individuals, and not have to represent the entirety of a female perspective. And like normalizing women disagreeing. Super cool. Love that. Want more of that.
Someone that I really appreciate and who's gotten a lot, like doesn't have a great reputation is Sabrina Stanley. And I had a great experience with her where I was managing this brand. Avery was one of my athletes, and she tagged along for the photo shoot. And honestly, she was a bitch like the whole time. And I say that because at the end of it, she was doing that. We compete against each other, putting on a hard front. And we didn't vibe at first. And then eventually, we spent 2 days together and she apologized, which I super respect. But I kind of like her brash attitude because it's authentic. You know, she doesn't care. Yeah. And and I appreciate that Adidas really supports her. But as a woman, I feel fear that A, I will become isolated, and B, that the brands that I work with will not represent me in my authentic self. Sometimes.
Yeah. Like my goal for myself is to not be an asshole, but create a world where I could hypothetically, if that was me being my authentic self. Yeah. And I just think that there's just a lot of pressure on women to be perfect and nice and not kind, I don't know. I think nice is such a sugar-coated way of being, particularly a woman. It just really flattens the experience of being a person.
Exactly. And there's this whole, saying of a nice girl, and you want a nice girl, and what is that?
Yeah.
And that's a lot of pressure to be a nice girl.
And I don't always identify. I definitely aspire to be someone who lives up to my highest values of kindness and compassion and empathy. But I don't need the culture dictating the terms on which I achieve that. And I think that that's kind of the spot we're at now is we're finally allowing people to be multiple ways the way that certain other groups have always been allowed. But I forgot the first part of the question.
Yeah, I was just going to bring it back to the first part of the question, which was, and I think you brought up an interesting point because you, because we have all these expectations on us and that kind of skews on how we really feel. And, makes it brings a lot of guilt, at least in me, into when I'm standing on a start line or in the days before a start line. And I'm so excited for my friends and competitors to compete, but I have the sense of guilt of being there's this tiny catty part of me that's fighting to come out right now, and I'm pushing it down, and I feel guilty about that. And I feel guilty about not honestly being able to voice that. Even, there's a difference between voicing it and acting on it.
Yes.
And I was wondering how you cope with that. Because, and maybe you don't feel that way ever, but I feel like it's pretty universal.
I do, yes.
Yeah. So I was, first part of the question, how do you cope with that as someone who is a competitive elite athlete, but also reporting on these athletes with the expectation from competitors, friends, and society to be nice?
Yeah, totally. And I think that a lot of women who are taking up space in this industry feel that pressure of a spotlight. I have to do perfect, I have to be perfect. And that's not great. Don't love that. I think for me, it's acknowledging I'm having normal competitive feelings. It is okay to not feel like Mother Teresa towards every other woman on the start line. And that's okay. That's not bad. Doesn't make me a bad feminist. Doesn't make me a bad woman. Doesn't make me a bad competitor. And I think, like you said, you have to acknowledge, here's how I feel. Here's how I'm going to act in alignment with my values. Because how I feel isn't always going to be the same thing as where my values are. But if you don't acknowledge, here's how I feel, I actually think that makes it much harder to actually act in accordance with your values. For me, tamping down my emotions, that's not in alignment with my truest values, right? And I think there's a lot of other women, at least what I see, right? Surface level, who knows what's going on inside, right? But it sometimes seems like so many women are so good at lifting everyone up all the time, unconditionally. They've never had a negative thought about anyone else. And I'm like, man, I wish I could be that. Why am I not perfect like this person? Well, A, I have no idea what's going on inside their head. Yeah. And B, I think it's normal to have mixed feelings about competing. That's very normal, very human. We should let women be humans is just my core message throughout this. And I think that just talking about it and saying it's okay to not feel rah, rah, rah 100% of the time. But I do think that, again, working towards that place where we're acting in accordance with our values, right? Acknowledge the inner asshole that we all have, and then shoot for the values that you've established with yourself.
Yeah.
But it is tough. Especially I consume a lot of media about women, and some of them are my friends or women I've competed against, had positive, negative, every human experience with. And 99.99% of the time, I genuinely do feel such a cheerleader for women in the sport. And I think that even in the few years that I've been in this space, things have grown so quickly and more women are getting elevated, and that is awesome. But I can only truly feel that way because when I have mixed feelings or feelings I haven't fully explored, but tamping them down, not addressing them, painting over them, not allowing room for complexity and nuance and mixed feelings is just not, that's not true to me. That's not true to what I hear from other people as being the human experience. And I just think we have to just not put pressure to have to think perfectly about our competitors.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I feel like, especially in the women's space, there's a lot of judgment from women towards other women, and I think part of that is the just societal pressure, you know, and the lack of opportunity. But you know, like when after Western States in 2017, I've struggled with that because all of a sudden I'm like trying to be friends with all these people who I just had beat, you know, who were the favorites, and then was getting bad reactions, and then, you know, was being harshly judged by other women for the way I was doing things and approaching sport. And then also my own complexities of being, you know, I'd been kind of, by accident, this representative for women's sports by this like blog that I don't know if you were around for that. I wrote like this blog in 2017, and so all of a sudden I was like this spokesperson for women in sport that I you know, I was just speaking my mind and my experience. And you know, that the falling out of all of that article, then Western States, and then my experience with other women in sport, just I was jaded for a little while. And I think about your experiences in the media and being able to report on women who may not have been nice to you, or you know, or that you like really want to race well against one day because you're a competitor. And it is crazy. And I think for me, I'm an extremely sensitive person. That sounds like a roller coaster.
Yes. Yeah. Shout out to all the empaths out there. It's hard. It's rough.
Yeah.
I think something that really is tough for me, especially as someone, like, I think I really like that you said, here's what I was writing from my experience.
Yeah.
An unwilling spokesperson, right? But you've been very honest the whole time. Like, this is my experience. I am Kat. I do not speak for all women. I speak for the Kat perspective, which can sometimes shine light on the experience of other women. And occasionally, like, I really am passionate about reporting on gender equity and just equity in general in the sport. It is tough for me when I report on an issue like childcare access and how that affects women getting into particularly longer distances. And I'll have women reach out and they're like, this isn't my experience. Like, I've never had a problem with childcare. I don't know why it's a problem for anyone else. I think that your experience is valid. Love that you've never had a problem with childcare. That doesn't devalue the experience of other women. I think we're in this tough space where, like, so often women don't even know for so long that they've been taught to see their experience as everyone else's, because that's how our media always represents it, is like, here's Kat, she speaks for all women, right? And like, that's not even what you're doing. That's just kind of like what the lens of the media inadvertently often does. And then it colors the way we see ourselves, and that colors how we see other people. And I think that we all need to get a lot more comfortable saying, this is my experience, not everyone's. And like, oh, actually, you've had a problem with childcare. You tell me, like, that's very different than my experience. I'm curious. I'm listening.
Yeah, totally. And you know, you've mentioned in the past too that you get a lot of feedback, and that's like a whole other component.
Much feedback.
Yeah, much feedback. What are some of the examples of feedback that you get that's about the human experience? That's great, but like, let's open it up. Like, what is the shitty things people have said to you?
Yeah.
And also, like,
I've gotten some things that were so profoundly shitty that I don't think I can say them into a microphone.
No, you can say them on a microphone.
Oh, dude.
I'm so curious.
I literally had a guy say he wanted to come on my face.
Oh, gross.
Over Instagram. Yeah. That was one that, like, I was like, I'm screenshotting this for my lawyer.
Yeah. Good job.
I mean, yeah, I've had death threats, like, and a lot of times it is just it's in response to, I'll write something about someone else's experience and how that might shed light on a larger systemic or cultural issue that won't resonate with someone, which is good and normal because we all have different experiences. But I think when people, their ego kind of like rises up and they're like, wow, like, a big one I get is like, I've never seen racism on the start line of a race. Right. And I'm like, well, you're a white guy from Iowa. Like, yeah, probably not, you know? And I think that we just need to get, like, just because you've never seen something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And if someone else is telling you, here's who I am, here's what I've seen, this thing does exist, you really should listen. And you should also definitely not yell at the person who just wrote the article reporting on someone else. Like, yelling at Zoe from Trail Runner doesn't make racism go away. If it did, I'd be a lot more chill with people yelling at me. But it's tough to see people intentionally choose not to respect and listen to the experiences of other people.
Yeah.
But the fact that they're lashing out at me means that they can sense something within them being protective and defensive. And so I think that's an important thing to lean into. If you ever feel like writing a mean comment or sending a mean email, like, what about me is hurt? Do I need to listen to that?
Yeah, that's so amazing. I just had this, it was just Thanksgiving weekend. I just had this whole conversation with my family where the men in the family were basically overlooking the women's opinions, and they weren't getting any attention. And when it was voiced, there was tons of friction.
Yeah,
to put lightly. And I was trying to describe this to my youngest brother, who was really just trying to understand, which I really appreciated. Was just he was the one that could see it the best because he wasn't guarded and defensive. How do you unarm some of those defensive?
Yeah, I think early on, I used to want to be perfect. I used to want to be seen as like a perfect, kind, and compassionate person.
Yeah.
That made my particularly DEI work or storytelling work. This was clearly someone who was more interested in being seen as right than getting it right. And I think that being more humble, particularly in talking with other folks who are maybe struggling, they're not getting it right. I can make them more interested in getting it right if I own up to the fact that I don't always get it right. I make a lot of mistakes. I get things wrong. I'm still learning. I'm still growing. There's things I still disagree with. There's things that I still that I could change my mind on that I haven't yet. And come along for this journey with me imperfectly. I think that, particularly because things have been really polarized, it's been tough for people to sit in nuance and complexity. Mm-hmm. And I want to sit in that space more because I feel like that's a more comfortable place for people to get to. But if you expect people to be perfect and get everything right off the bat, they're not going to, and they're going to sense that that's bullshit, and they're not going to come along with you. So I think being able to say hey, yeah, I make a lot of mistakes in this space. I've gotten things wrong. I'm going to keep getting things wrong despite my best intentions. Come try to do better with me. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm asking you to try to understand, which I think is the key sentence you just said is I don't need to change your mind today. I do want you to try to understand.
And that's really hard for people sometimes.
It's a scary space.
Yeah, it is a scary space. And especially when we're talking about things like equity and racism, and because it's uncomfortable.
Just anything. It's scary to be open, to feel flexible in what you think is true, what's not true. That's a scary,
and not only
human
that,
brains don't do well with that.
To realize, oh shit, maybe I'm doing something wrong, and I'm not intentionally doing this. I'm a kind-hearted person that really is trying their best, but I'm doing something that doesn't serve the community, and it's a total accident, and that can really be hard to hear.
That's tough. We don't like to think of ourselves as wrong or unkind, so sometimes we'll tell whatever story we need to tell to back up our beliefs about ourselves. And I think that sometimes you have to be okay, I'm going to stop storytelling about myself. I'm just going to listen to another human for just a minute.
Yeah, I think being defensive is, as you said, just a sign of
and it's totally normal.
Yeah.
We all do it. I'll do it today. I'll do it tomorrow. We did it yesterday. But I think just leaning into more awareness of
that. And
it's
identifying, how we talked about identifying that cattiness, which is an embarrassing thing to admit. I hate that I can bring out the claws.
Well, especially because for so long, particularly with women, it's a stereotype about women that we're catty, we get in cat fights, we're petty. Okay, when you see guys do it, no one typecasts it as being petty. They're these are men that are all in on competition.
Yeah.
But when women do it, it's diminished. I think even the phrasing and the verbiage we use, this is just a normal human response to competition. I think it's especially normal, again, when you have women whose stories have been decentered and there's less resources, and there's increasingly more resources. Things are getting better.
Less opportunity.
But when you've had a smaller group of people fighting for scraps within the larger community, shit's gonna get weird. We're gonna say things we don't mean. We're gonna get even more defensive. And then when I think that people in power, the best thing you can do to stay in power is keep the people who have less power fighting against each other. And so I'm always so skeptical and suspicious of any narrative that is overemphasizes women disagreeing or that denormalize, because it's normal, but it shouldn't be the centerpiece of any story. It's a normal part of the story, but anytime you over focus on feminist info or women fight, that's not the full picture. And to portray it as such, is clearly meant to like factionalize a marginalized group.
Mm-hmm. And yet there's like reality TV shows that have been curated
exactly.
around
Of just
this.
women throwing wine in each other's faces.
Exactly. And that feeds into this narrative and takes away the power of the woman in general. I own my place in Ned, and we're renting, Carson and I are renting it out. And I was so lenient on rent every month. And I was like, hey, just so you know, I have to put it on a credit card when you're late on rent. Just so you know.
I can't tell you how many times I've moderated my actions to avoid doing totally normal things. I was afraid of being seen as a bitch.
Oh, and
being called a bitch.
So get this. And then the lease ends. These guys trash this house. And I'm like being like, you never paid rent on time. You trashed the house. Of course, I'm going to keep your super cheap deposit that I gave you because you told me you couldn't afford more deposit. And after me going out of my way to be flexible, this guy called me snappy or snippy or something. And I was like, and then Carson called him, and Carson was like, he's a nice guy. And not because Carson saw anything different, but because he respected a man. And for me, my behavior was bitchy and snappy.
Yes.
And that, I'll never forget that, and how I approach professional relationships and friendships is like, as a woman, we just have to be, or as women, we just have to be set in our boundaries and know that there's going to be some societal implications, and stick to it, because the other way around is to bend over backwards and to still have the societal implications affect us. I did everything for this guy. This guy was like 15 days late on rent one time. And I have a mortgage that like I can't just pay out of pocket,
And it's like, it's always the same words, like shrill, snappy, bitchy. Like you never hear those levied against men. Like at one point I was working with a younger male freelancer. It was like his first ever piece. I gave him an edit. The thing that is my job is to give feedback on writing. I gave him normal feedback like anyone else, and he thought I was being a bitch.
Oh my God.
I was just doing my job, which is to give, like, you solicited feedback on this piece that I am paying you for. Like, so, like, I am your boss. You need to meet my expectations because that's how jobs are. And he thought I was being bitchy. And so I passed him on to a male colleague, and they had like a totally normal interaction that was like basically just him amplifying like what I had already said. And I just think that's tough, and I don't like it.
Yeah, I know. I'm the same way.
Just me performing the normal, doing my job can be perceived by some people as bitchy.
Yeah. And it is, if you talk to any woman in any industry, it's a shared experience.
Yeah.
And I think this episode of this podcast, unfortunately, won't be as popular because 55% of my people are men.
Yeah.
And this is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And again, the reaction is to get defensive, to click on follow because it's something that they don't want to hear.
Or to like, even like how many good guys have already just like tuned out, like, this isn't me. And I think that's also something that can be addressed.
That's huge. And, or again, it goes back into thinking about your own experience as the experience of everyone else. Like, oh, I would never do that, Yeah. So of course I can't relate to these women. This is speaking from a man's perspective. I can't relate to these women or want to protect them because I would never do it.
Yeah.
And that's
I'm one of the good ones.
Yeah, I'm one of the good ones. And that's great. We need a lot of good ones.
And we need you bringing your friends along for
but please share this podcast with someone that you might know that might be uncomfortable by listening to it, I'm
uncomfortable saying it. Like, it's uncomfortable stuff to say because you're not a cool, chill gal if you bring up that you don't like being perceived as a bitch.
Yeah. And, especially like if you look at the industry as a whole, the people who get ahead are cool and chill, which is like
easy to work with, like not political.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Easy, and not only that, but like, embraces masculine work culture,
yes. Yes.
And
the embodiment like is basically a dude, but backwards and in heels, like the Ginger Rogers thing,
Exactly.
And I think that like, I want like women should be allowed to be as difficult. All people of all genders should be allowed to be difficult.
Yeah.
To be themselves.
Exactly.
To be easy, to be whoever they are. And that there's just always been this double standard.
And I think if it was more of a two-way conversation, people would find that it's not actually difficult. We're just saying like, hey, I don't like that.
Yes.
Which men feel very comfortable saying,
Yeah.
And you know what? changed for that. You know, a male-dominated industry says this is not right, and we change.
Yeah,
you know? So your 5-year trajectory, is that how long you've been with Trail Runner?
Yeah, about 5 years. You've
grown a lot in that industry, and I'm, for obvious reasons, you're super intelligent. You're personable and fun to be around and have a different perspective, and you're fast. So like that of course is a notch in your belt. But it also seems like it's been taken on with this, you have a responsibility to not only represent the underrepresented, but speak out on things like climate change, call out brands that maybe aren't being good to the industry, and but still wanting to maintain a good relationship with those brands because opportunities come in there too. Can you speak a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think I got into the industry at a good time for who I am as a person. And it was at a time where I really was inspired by other women, particularly to have a journalism that didn't pretend to be unbiased. And that was my biases are that I like trail running. I want to be a steward of the sport. This sport happens on planet Earth. I want to be a steward of planet Earth. I think that all people should be trail runners. How do I make that happen? And not pretending that there aren't systems going on, and I think that's kind of had been the default posture, was that we can't get political. We're unbiased. There's two types of people in this world. There's people who are biased and people who are unaware of their biases. And I think that for so long, folks in the industry had been well, we can't report on climate change because it's political. My stance is that if you want to trail run, it's going to be on planet Earth, most likely. You should be very invested in the preservation and stewardship of this planet. Not just for trail running reasons, but if that's how I get you into the conversation, then great, come along. And I think that it's because I kind of came in at this time when a lot of other women were really owning their space as athlete activists, or I think of Claire Gallagher really owning her platform, or I think of Megan Hicks really taking her role as a incredible athlete and journalist and steward of the sport very seriously, and allowing it to be her to be a figurehead of that conversation. And I just feel I was really picking up on the lessons that they, I think, amongst lots of other women, right, were pioneering, and just kind of putting it all together at kind of a crusty legacy institution. So one of the things that I really love, and is also a huge challenge about Trail Runner, is that it's very much not preaching to the choir. And that's an exciting opportunity. It's a scary opportunity because a lot of people disagree with me, which is great and I welcome. But those are the people that I most want to bring along and most want to include in these conversations.
Can you give me some specifics of things that people have disagreed with you on?
I think just that it's not appropriate to talk about the climate generally, that it's too political. Whereas again, I drink water, as do you, and we breathe air and we run on Earth. And I think that it is telling that some people feel that those things are too political. It's because we've been told that it's not okay to disagree. You've got to just we can only talk about things that we agree on. And I'm sure that you and I would disagree about a lot of things, and that is awesome and good. That is productive. Hopefully us disagreeing, you would change my mind and help me evolve my understanding of things. And I think that as Americans, we do live in a polarized and kind of hypercharged time, but I think that having more intimate, chill disagreements, productive disagreements, is good and healthy. And I think that because the macro climate is not great, doesn't feel healthy, doesn't feel productive, the micro kind of falls by the wayside because you and I both are aware that again, the world feels really hypercharged, hyperpartisan. We might be afraid to just bring these things up in our personal lives and push each other to be better and have a more nuanced and a more complex understanding, or a more informed understanding. And I think that's part of it. But I think people are scared to get political. They're scared to find out they're wrong. A lot of people view trail running as an escape. I get that. I want that more than anything. Unfortunately, a lot of folks don't have the privilege of leaving their identity at the door when they go trail running. It has never been and will never be an escape for them. And I want to be a stand-in for them in this space so that it could presumably one day be an escape. But I think that to bend our content to fit a very loud group of people who think that trail running can be and should only be an escape is not correct, not just, not accurate. I'm not saying it should never be something that helps you detach from the, the larger challenging things that are going on. But if you do that and you never once acknowledge that other people can't do that, I think that's a really, that's a tough place to come from. Yeah. And yeah, I think that I think that they're just not used to seeing sports be political. But I think that particularly with like folks our age, younger folks, millennials, like that is kind of the soup we grew up in. I think that like because of living through recessions, like entering a challenging job market and housing market, like we're all pretty comfortable with understanding like, yeah, like I've got student debt. That's a political issue. Okay, my life is political. Everything is political. Let's talk about it. Yeah. And I think that like people are just getting increasingly comfortable with understanding how politics bleeds into your daily life, whether you like it or not, and not just tying it to like larger national politics. But I think that I just want more people to understand that like things that are quote unquote political don't have to be scary, don't have to be polarizing. It's a big fun swimming pool. We can all come and splash around and play in together. Again, we're going to disagree. That's good. That's normal. I'm not trying to change everyone's mind. I don't want people to tell me I'm right. I don't want people to tell me I'm smart. I do want people to challenge me, but I want us to at least talk about it.
Yeah. I can't help think about some of these conversations that you've had internally with your company, and especially being a young woman in this industry who's incredibly intelligent and in a position of power. And I'm guessing a lot of the conversations you have are, not to get back and to beat a dead horse, but are with men. Yeah. And men of power. And I'm just like relating it back to conversations that I've had on a micro level with family, with people. And and I know a lot of women, sometimes they don't speak out on something they believe with or correct someone, a family member or a friend, and have open the door for discussion because it is polarizing. And it, in the past 5 years, 8 years especially, it's been a point of contention so great that it ruins relationships. Yeah. And how would you recommend someone going about that? Just a person, because you have this environment where you're doing it every day as part of your job, and clearly you're skilled at it. So what advice would you give to, say, me, who wants to have these conversations and relationships? Yeah,
I think, again, starting from that place of like humility and like, I get a lot of stuff wrong. That, again, allows people to like, the first thing that you establish is like, we're both allowed to mess up. And I'm not going to, because I think a lot of times people are afraid to jump into these conversations because they're afraid they'll get something wrong, or they'll be judged for not being perfect or having the absolutely correct like ideology memorized down to a T. And like, I don't, and like, I'm not super interested in people that do. I'm interested in learning and being challenged. And again, just like creating space for you to come along with me. And I think starting from that place of humility and asking people questions like, how do you feel about this? How do you feel that this resonates with your experience? How does this not resonate with your experience? Like, what can I learn from you? And then using that to like tailor your entry point to their experience, because just shouting about your experience or other people's experience to someone that it doesn't resonate with, really doesn't work. One of the first articles I ever wrote in the sports journalism space was back when I was a young journalist in Arkansas. And the Trump administration had just slashed part of the NASA budget that was meant to do climate work and climate monitoring, which that's not a story that's going to play super great in rural Arkansas. However, I also found that the college baseball used that same weather forecasting system to predict weather for baseball games. That's a story a lot more folks are going to relate to, because like, a lot of people, and like, we're all here because we genuinely care about a sport. I'm not here to diminish people caring about sports, because I care a ton about a very silly sport. You care about baseball? Awesome. Here's how I'm going to make my issue relate to what you care about. I'm going to make it relevant to you. I'm not going to expect you to figure out what I care about is relevant to you. Yeah. That's my job. And I think just making it real to other people, because it is real, whether or not they feel it or not yet, it's freaking real.
How do you cope with, and again, I have no plan on asking these questions, but I'm just so interested in your thoughts on this, because you deal with it a lot. How do you deal with, in a family, or how would you advise someone in a family that, has like a racist grandfather and refuses to see that he is racist and refuses to admit it? And, a lot of the times it is, I like, as an ally, I'm not going to talk to this guy anymore, even though he's your grandfather, even though you have to be in situations where you're with him, and he's like an old guy who you have to, and I say this, like, I all my grandfathers are dead, so like that's why I specifically choose that.
We all have challenging family members. Yeah.
And, but I didn't want to bring it back to any of mine. But like, how do you balance that relationship with those conversations? Because in my experience, it, like, in family, it can be so crazy and polarizing, and you don't want to just like ignore it, but at some point you like can't keep fighting. What are your thoughts?
I would say like you are not obligated to do anything, like if you feel unsafe or like if you have to set that boundary. I've never gotten to that point, and I absolutely understand people that have and need to preserve their mental health or even physical health. That's a different thing. You do you. If you're someone who it's more just like, oh my God, this, like, every conversation, like, I feel so, it's hard. And it's hard because you probably really genuinely love that person. And it is hard to hold in our little human brains, I love this person, and man, do we disagree about this thing I really care about. Acknowledge that that's hard, totally normal and good. And like lean into that. Like, you have that connection of love. Like, that's half the freaking battle. But I think that asking questions, like, so often I value being seen as smart. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into an argument with a family member and I've like listened to an Ezra Klein podcast and I read like the perfect article and I've like got all the talking points. That never works. Like, that never changes someone's mind. You just get defensive and you end up trying to like dunk on someone that you love, which always feels bad no matter how many times you dunk on them. And like how smart you feel, it feels bad to be in conflict that way. I think just asking them really honest questions like, how do you relate to this issue? How does your experience inform how you feel about this? Like, I always think something like, are you willing to change your mind about this? And what information would change your mind? If they're not willing to change, if there's nothing that could change their mind about something, I think that you have your answer.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing to find out. Like, whenever I'm entering into an argument or a conversation with someone about something, like, I'll tell them, there is no information that you can give me that will convince that like climate change isn't caused by humans and isn't something we should spend the majority of our time addressing. Just know that. If you're going to try to change my mind about this, it's not a good use of your time. That's my background. But there's other things I'll be like, yeah, I'm pretty flexible on this. I think that just we owe it to each other to acknowledge, I don't care if your goal is to change my mind on this. It's not going to happen. Like, we can both respect each other a lot more if we're in alignment on this.
Yeah. In alignment on not going into it.
Yeah. And not being as goal oriented. I think coming in with like more humility, acknowledging like you're very unlikely to change someone's mind. You can open their mind though. I think that like kind of creating those little cracks for doubt to creep in, for empathy to creep in, for love to creep in. It's harder to do. It takes a lot longer. It doesn't make you feel as smart and cool as like nailing your facts and like winning the debate. But it does actually work.
Yeah. And like winning the debate is never good for relationships in my...
Never, yeah, exactly. No matter how many times you like nail those talking points, you never walk away feeling good.
Yeah. Even if they're like, fine, I concede.
Yeah. Which like, that's like never,
That's not the point.
Yeah.
The point is to... make change, and when you can see that the change might be beneficial in your unit, in your family, and you see a place you can make direct impact, it's hard to let that sit.
Yeah, totally.
It's really hard.
Especially like when you are like a really well-intentioned person that wants to help other people, be a part of and like believe in the things you believe in. Yeah. It takes so much humility and so much discipline to say, I am not going to try to change this person's mind. I'm not going to use this as an opportunity to convince myself I'm right. I'm going to be humble. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to challenge myself at every turn. And I'm just going to create opportunity for change.
Yeah. And that's so hard, especially when you like disagree with the way someone's living their life, and think the way that they're living their life is like doing a lot of harm. And even small things, like someone in my life that I love to death is like addicted to plastic water bottles. Won't drink tap water, won't drink filtered water, will only drink water from plastic.
Yeah.
I'm like, how?
I think
it's been like a 20-year conversation of trying to...
I feel this like, so I follow a certain diet. Oftentimes when I'm eating with other people, they feel the need to be apologetic about their diet around my diet. Don't do that. I don't need that. Like, you do you, man. I'm not trying to change your mind about how you
That's
eat. Like,
great.
so much of like this culture, like especially like for a woman, like I've had enough stuff shoved down my throat how I should or shouldn't eat and how much and like when and where. Like, I don't need that. I'm not going to do that to you. You can ask me questions if you're curious. If you're not curious, I don't want to tell you about what I'm eating. We have better stuff to talk about.
Yeah, that's such good
I don't
advice.
need diet performance.
Yeah.
Please don't do that.
Man, I want to take this and listen to it every year around Christmas.
Advice for Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Cool. Well, to pivot, we started this topic of how you've grown in the last 5 years within your job and how you handle some of those conversations. What do the next 5 years look like for you in running, in career? Like what? And I want to hear like your top goals.
Yeah. I want to get good at running 100 miles. Like, I love that distance. It's such a crazy puzzle, and I have not solved it. And as soon as I thought I solved it, I very much unsolved it on myself. Love that ultra running consistently does that for us. But I want to continue to evolve at that distance. I feel really emotionally connected to it. I don't know why. I want to get better at that. I want to become a student of that distance specifically. I love it. I'm committed. However long it takes, 5 years, 10 years, 15, like boom, I got time. Like I work from home. Well, let's do this. Let's do this running.
Yeah.
Like I'm game. Like my body's holding up reasonably well. Yeah, let's do this.
Yeah.
And I want to get faster and like learn to take better care of my body.
Yeah.
That's tough.
What's that mean for you?
I think just like not like learning to listen to my body better. It's so hard. Like I'm pretty young. So I've had the privilege for years and years and years of running through stuff that you cannot run through for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And just like learning to rest better. Like this month I had to take some time off after this race we did in Mexico. My knee hurt and I voluntarily rested, and I've never done that before in my life. And just going to shout myself out for that level of growth of not running on something that actively hurts.
Yeah. Hey, Nux. Me
Yeah.
too. I took 2 weeks, zero. No, didn't get off the couch.
Yeah. And that's kind of wild for me. Like I usually want to run the day before I start running back from like I'm chomping at the bit after this race. I was like, no, I'm good, man.
Yeah,
like
same.
There's plenty of stuff on Netflix that I want to see.
Yeah,
like
and
I'm not trying to.
I think the key is going to be to take those rest periods, even if we're chomping at the bit, knowing like, okay, I'm dying to get out, but I'm also like maybe a little sick, and also like my heel hurts a little bit.
Yeah. Like I've done that thing of like you run the day that you shouldn't run, and it like if you just rested for 3 days, you could have avoided like weeks or months of like hurt. And I think I prevented weeks and months of hurt just by taking like a few extra days to like check in, do some PT.
Same.
Be like normal and cool.
I'm
Like,
serious.
Be cool, man.
This week is the first week I feel back to normal from Mexico.
Yeah, I'm still like, I took time off for my knee, then I got COVID. It's been a journey. I've taken the most time off this month than like since I started running that I've taken off.
Yeah.
And super proud of that.
I'm proud of you
Yay,
because
rest.
I didn't do that for a lot of years. And
Yeah.
I ended up having to take, I took all of November and December off last year. I looked at it the other day. I went for 5 runs total, November and December last year. And the year before I took 9 weeks off too. And that was like burnout. That was life stress. And I was keeping like hitting my head against the wall, trying to maintain this level of fitness and be a professional. But you can't be a professional all the time.
No. Yeah. It's like, there's so many cliches that like, I hate all of, like, I would love to push through. I would love to keep going. It has just never worked.
Yeah.
It has never worked for anyone. And if someone says it works, it's because they're faking it and it's going to stop working any second now.
Yeah.
But like, nothing blooms all year round, right? Like nothing in nature is like full on all year round. And that's normal and good. I'm a human. I'm an animal. I'm a part of this world. Gotta rest.
Totally. And I think the lesson for me, at least, is, again, talking about the last few years, me needing to take breaks. I didn't run, again, like 5 times in 2 months last year, and the same thing in 2020. And like this year, fall's come around, I took 2 weeks totally off, and then I took 2 more of very little running, being super flexible. And then I ran today and yesterday, and I'm like, wow, I'm actually way fitter than I was before this race.
Yeah. When you don't work against your body, like you will be fit. Working against your body does not make you more, even though like, and it's so tempting. I wish it did. I mean, I'm glad it doesn't, because what a great gift to just know that if you give yourself what you need, you'll get better.
Yeah. it takes a lot of confidence, but even if you look at it just from like a physiological perspective, we have to adapt. And
adapt.
The more stress you put on your body, the longer it's going to take to adapt. And you're similar to me in that we feel every second of every single day, plus train at a high level.
Yes.
So things are going to take even longer than someone who might just be running full time.
Yeah. And I think that that's such again, like, I just am excited because I feel like culturally we're moving towards a place of like glorifying that increasingly less, and just want to celebrate that. It's not easy for me. I don't like it. I wish I was not a human and could just run through whatever, but I am a human. Likely a lot of the listeners are human. Yeah. This is cool and good.
It'd be cool if there was.
And even like mentally, like I'm learning that in work. Like I feel like so often in my writing too, I feel bad that I'm not generating my best work every day. And that's just not, you can't. That's not normal. And I think so often, like, we only ever see other people's best work. So it looks like everyone else is doing their best work all the time. No, that's just your brain incorrectly constructing a pattern to beat yourself over the head and make yourself feel bad.
Yeah. One of my favorite things that I've been seeing lately that has honestly like helped me a lot and is so silly is on Instagram. I'll see people post like, hey, it's okay that you're taking a rest today.
Yeah.
Like, you can't do this all the time. And I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. And I feel validated, and me just like needing to stare at a blank wall for 30 minutes.
Yes. Yeah. So key. And just like in all things.
Yeah.
And I'm learning more and more, like, to perform at a high level at whatever it is you're doing, writing, running, whatever it is, like parenting. Rest, phases, growth, adaptation. It just is all cycles.
Yeah. I want to hear some non-running goals for you in 5 years. Like, I want to hear Zoe as a whole person, not just an athlete in 5 years. So career, hobby, where are you physically? Where are you mentally and emotionally 5 years from now?
Yeah. So I'm publishing my first book in August.
Ow.
I would like to have another book at least written in 5 years.
Yeah.
I have some like nonfiction idea, and like writing a book, super hard. Took me way longer. I missed like every deadline. So just I feel like whenever I see someone else write a book, I assume, because my brain is flawed, that this must have been so easy for them. They're such a natural. They're so smart. It's not easy. It took a long time.
Yeah.
I turned in everything late. I was a shit show. My editor probably hates me. They stayed with me anyway. Thank you, editor. And I would like to learn from some of the challenges I encountered in writing my first book and do a better job at writing a second book.
Yeah. By the way, every single person that I've ever talked to who's written a book said also that they missed every deadline. So they must make those deadlines. Yeah.
And like occasionally I'll have other people reach out. They're like, man, I'm writing a book too, and it's like not going well. I'm like, yeah, it's bad. Like, it's it's bad. It's a hard thing to do. Yeah. So writing a book, not easy, not for everyone. Maybe not for me. But I did it.
Probably.
Yeah, but probably.
Probably for you.
But I want to do, like, it's like when you have like a terrible race and you're like, man, that was fucking awful. Can't wait to do it again.
Yeah,
that's kind of how I feel. That's the phase I'm at in book writing. And I want to just get better at writing generally. It takes like a lot of practice. I think that I've seen like myself grow in fits and starts in my like writing practice and my ability this year. And I want to keep cultivating that and keep reminding myself that just because like I'll go through like a fallow period, that doesn't mean it's going to last forever. And you have to keep showing up, giving yourself the opportunity to improve, and then not beating yourself over the head when you don't. Like, we all have an off run day, an off article, an off book, maybe even. And that's just part of the growth process, and it'll all add up to something much better someday. And I want to keep growing. Like, I want to grow the run category at Outside. Like, I would like to grow our staff. I would like to grow our advertising potential. I'd like to grow our audience. I want to bring more people in. I really feel, and that's not like so that more people can read me. Like, no, I just want more people trail running. I'm very pro trail running, very pro running. And I think that growing our audience means more people are empowered to get out there and explore their potential on their own terms. And I want to be along for that ride. And I want it to just be for more people. I want to be kinder to myself. It's a hard thing to do. I'm not great at it. And like, just keep doing all the boring therapy, self-work kind of stuff that makes it easier for me to navigate the world as a kinder person.
Yeah. I have so many questions in that a little bit. First, what does practicing writing for you as someone who makes a career out of it? And for, I'm a writer and I am unpracticed right now. And I think about this Stephen King quote, and it's going to be a misquote, but that to be a great writer, you have to do two things above all, and that's write and read.
Yeah.
And I just don't have the time. And so I'm wondering, like, what, as you're writing a book and you write jokes and you are working, like, what does practice mean for you? Is that in your fiction? And also, how do you find the time?
Yeah, I think, like, it is my day job, so I do have a certain amount of time afforded to progressing that, which is privileged and lucky and great. But I think also, in order to make sure that not all of my writing serves it's not all going to be about running, hopefully. A lot of times it is. But, like, I don't want it all to have to necessarily fit into that box of, like, this is writing I do to make money at my job of trail runner. Kind of expanding that and giving myself time and space to, like, experiment. And that means a lot of it's going to be super bad. And, like, having people in my life that I trust to send stuff to, and also just talking and building relationships with other writers who are like, yeah, like, I've just done a bunch of shitty writing, or like, oh, I've done something kind of weird and brave, like, want to look at it. And editing things is really, really helpful. And seeing other people's bad writing, seeing other people's good writing. And I think also expanding the definition of reading. Like, I love reading, and I don't always, like, I'm a big reader. Like, most phases of my life, I read a lot of books very intentionally. There's also phases where I don't, and it's like, I try not to, like, make it be a whole, like, identity crisis thing where I'm like, am I still smart? Or am I still a good reader if I'm not currently reading, like, War and Peace? Like, oh my God, I haven't read Tolstoy in, like, 3 days. Like, who am I? You read a lot, like, whether or not you recognize it, like, you're reading, you're communicating all the time. And that's the essential skill. And I think that especially being a writer is you do have to sit down and do the writing is the bad news. But I think also trying to, like, inhabit your life and inhabit the world as a writer and really become a keen observer of your own inner life and trying to become a keen observer of other people's inner lives and being curious and just paying attention to what you're paying attention to. Because that's oftentimes where the best ideas or story fodder or just, like, kind of sticky things that you want to visit in your writing come from. Is like, I notice I'm really thinking about this a lot, or like, I notice I'm really thinking about this person a lot, and leaning into that, or at least being curious about it.
Yeah.
But just, like, not beating yourself over the head if you don't feel like you're reading great works of literature all the time. Like, you're reading, like, this, engaging in this conversation, if you're listening, if you're thinking about it, that can be part of your writing practice.
Yeah. I read once because I was feeling guilty about the lack of reading. And as someone who was quite academic, my life is, swung in the other direction. But I've read that actually audiobooks and podcasts have the same brain effect and same, like, rub off on you the same way. You still retain the same amount of words. And a lot of people, it's a better way to retain stuff.
Yeah. I love audio. I listen to so many audiobooks on my runs. I love it. I'll re-listen to the same ones. Like, and I think that, like, culturally, just, like, again, expanding, like, again, you don't have to be with, like, a hardback copy of like Anna Karenina. Like, you can just read what is cool and fun to you. Like, listen to audio, like, however is easy for you to sustain an intellectual practice and foster that part of your life. Do the easy thing. Like, I think that we have this cultural obsession of, like, everything needs to feel hard and bad. Like, eat your vegetables. I'm like, nah, eat your cotton candy. Like, if you like cotton candy, eat cotton candy. That's fine. Like,
yeah, totally. And I found that in my own reading as well as the audiobooks and stuff, because my time is so limited that I found if I had a book that I was trying to grow from or learn from and intentionally reading for a purpose, I was not going to get to it. I wasn't going to read it. But if I'm excited about the book, I will.
Yeah.
So I've only gone towards what I love. Like, and I love fantasy. I'm like on fantasy book forums.
Yes. Deep in the Reddit thread. Kat Bradley.
It's not
reading.
Even like a Reddit thread. It's a way deeper, nerdier thread. And, but it's still BeRad is my name. Yeah. So look for me if you're also a nerd. And I found that, like, I love that part of myself. And by nurturing that and letting go judgment of that and, like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to read fantasy because that's what I will read.
Yeah.
It's not only created an environment and space for me to read, which is something that is inarguably good.
Yeah.
Good to do and productive. But it's also made me really proud and enjoy that part of myself.
Yeah.
It's made me embrace that nerdy part of me
Yeah.
and celebrate it, because it's brought new stuff to the table and to my work and creative ideas. So
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And again, like, lean into what's fun and interesting for you. I don't think reading needs to be a freaking, like, I'm dyslexic. Writing, whoa, boy. Reading, like, did not come naturally to me. And so, like, it has taken years to get comfortable with it. And that only came because I finally found books that, like, as a child, I just loved and were fun. And it stopped being a wrestling match, like, with my own brain every single time. And I feel like if it feels like a wrestling match for you, open your lens a bit. Like, find something that does speak to you. Like, if you like reading about sports, awesome. Just read about sports. Like, read about whales, read about high fantasy, read the newspaper, read the stock report, like, whatever speaks to you, like, read that and don't feel shame about it. And don't feel like, I think eventually you'll get to that point where you're curious about challenging yourself and you want to expand things. But I think that whenever you feel stagnant or just like you're not connecting with it, find the thing that, like, is easy and fun. I don't think that's bad.
Yeah, I think that's great, actually, because we're all super different. And if we try and conform and, educate ourselves on this one thing that we all agree it's good, we're just going to be carbon copies of each other. And that sucks.
Yeah.
Before we dive deeper into this, I had a second part of that question. And that's, you're, again, just like an insanely productive person. I see you and I'm like, there's not someone that I meet very often. I'm like, damn, her plate is fuller than mine, and I'm not comparing. I'm just in awe because
Game recognized game.
Game recognized game. Hell yeah. And I, TJ, your partner, who Carson and I totally adore. I'm just wondering how you guys balance that.
Yeah, I think it's a thing that I've learned in our partnership is that we both have different capacities, and that's very good. Like, what a full good day of work looks like to me is different than what that looks like to TJ. And one should not be more valuable to the partnership or to the culture than others.
Yeah.
And that, like, helps. That's what keeps a partnership going. Like, I would not want to be partnered with me as me. That would be a nightmare. And I would get really, like, I do get super competitive. And I do sometimes tie my value to my productivity. It is amazing to be with a partner who does that less and, like, is very interested in valuing themselves apart from productivity.
Yeah.
And I need that. Like, that challenges me. It makes me uncomfortable, and I love that.
Yeah. And how do you measure productivity in the relationship outside of your own personal goals? Because I find that, like, productivity in relationship is making time for one another, being intentional with that time, but also doing the dishes, which, I'm so busy, so I'm bad at that, you know? Or doing some of the little stuff, walking the dog, which I love, but can't sometimes.
Yeah. And it always is the little thing. Like, gosh, relationships, you challenge me. I think for me, I know that I'm showing up fully when I'm not using my need to be productivity as related to my self-valuation as a reason to not show up in the relationship, because I'm so lucky. I know that, like, kind of no matter what, TJ's going to love me unconditionally. And so, like, I'm always, like, the first to let things like dishes and dog walking and, like, making the bed slide. I feel like my best self when I value myself more according to how I show up for my partner, other relationships, friendships, parents. Like, am I taking time to call my sister? Am I checking in with my friends? And not using work as an excuse to not do those things. Because those things don't actually always come that naturally to me. Being a workhorse and just doing the same thing over and over and over again comes pretty naturally to me because I'm a human and we all have patterns, and, like, our culture really over rewards productivity at work, and our culture's not as good at rewarding and reinforcing like, oh, you were a good partner today. Like, yeah, especially for women, I think it's, like, a tough balance because, like, historically we've served partnerships in a way that's, like, kind of different now. And, like, I am not a traditional female partner in that, like, I really am not the person tending to hearth and home. And being able to step into that role and take on some of those things to serve the partnership is empowering and different, and it has kind of a different historical context, but, like, I have to really force myself to do those things. I don't enjoy them. I don't like them. I do like my partner. I do love my partner. So I have to, like, do those things and not consistently lean on work as an excuse to not show up just because I'm not being rewarded in all the same, like no one's ever, like you don't get Strava kudos for doing the dishes. Like you don't get a promotion for doing the dishes.
Yeah.
You just get a person who's going to love you unconditionally. So it's just you showing up to remind yourself, like, this is how I love that person. Like this is an action that reinforces love. And it's hard and tough, but I think learning from a partner who does that a bit more naturally is really great and challenging and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's not always great.
What are you working on right now in that context?
Yeah.
Or in any context?
Yeah.
I'm interested in that one because I am not. I work so much and it's not always intentional, but I tend to fill my space.
Oh, exactly. Like I use work as the thing that I'll just like squeeze into every gap I have because again, like I get rewarded for it. Our culture really rewards it. And that's tough. Like I have to consistently say like these other things are good and important. Just because you don't get money or praise from like strangers on the internet doesn't mean you shouldn't do, like that actually probably means you should do them more.
Yeah.
Is the hard thing. Like the fact that you won't be rewarded for this means you should be very invested in it. For me, it's doing chores and then not looking to my partner for praise for showing, like for meeting the bare minimum, for just doing it because I love that person and like trying to like untangle that, like I do a good thing, I get a reward. Doing things just because they're good is where I'm at. And I think that making my values, like making my actions match my values. I love my dog. She is my best friend and I'm terrible at showing up for her and really trying to intentionally make time to like go play ball with her or just like go snuggle her, go like attend to her needs is it's tough because no one sees and no one notices but her, and I have to do it anyway because it's what I actually love.
Yeah. And the dog is interesting because you do get a reward for that.
You do, big dopamine hit from the snuggle.
Yeah, big dopamine hit. You get like evidence of their affection for you and their appreciation.
Right. Or
However,
it's like that, like,
it's not the...
It's like a slower, like you do actually ultimately get rewarded for tending to the relationship because you get to continue in the relationship.
Exactly.
But that's like really long term and not how our brains are how our brains reward systems typically work. Like we think like a kudo, like a, you know, you get like a dog, you get a treat immediately.
Raise.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, a great article or a good podcast.
Yeah.
So, you know, I ask this question in all my podcasts because I think it's really interesting to see how all these high performing people, whether it's running, whether it's YouTube starring or whatever, what is different about your brain that allows you to be successful at what you do? You know, my brain is different, you know, and I found by leaning into those skills that I am successful. Not all healthy skills all the time, but
yes.
What's different
Some
about
of my
your brain?
maladaptations make me pretty successful, unfortunately.
Yeah. Elaborate.
Yeah. Well, I think learning to disentangle those maladaptations. Like I will tend to overwork because I've been rewarded for it in the past, or overachieve because I've been rewarded. And I'm trying to get, and it's tough because I do genuinely love running and writing. So I have to bring those things into alignment with like, I do this because I love it, not because I'm going to get rewarded or recognition, even though you might, and you have to not want that and training yourself to not want it and still work your ass off at it because you love it is tough. So trying to do that more, but yeah, just trying to disentangle, like, am I doing this because I feel that I'm not enough, or am I doing this because I love it? And leaning into and cultivating the side of myself that loves it and trying to really be compassionate towards part of myself that feels that I'm not enough and I need to shore up some part of myself with work or performance or like achievements or sticker, like whatever, gold star. Like I would do anything for a sticker. Like even as an adult, I would do it.
It's
you know?
a blessing and a curse because you are where you are because of that tendency. And, you know, but at the same time, it could destroy your life.
Exactly.
You know?
So like trying to figure out to disentangle and decouple those things and just have the intelligence to do so. But I think the thing that makes me good at them is that I'm a sensitive person. And I feel like our culture is not always, it's not like trendy or cool to be sensitive. And I think that, again, like a double-edged sword, not all parts of it are good. Because like I'll be over receptive to bad feedback because I'm sensitive. But I can be really sensitive to delicate feedback and leaning into that in a world that tells us to stay hard, to toughen up, to get a thicker skin, to grow up, to do all these things. Like I want to retain my childlike sensitivity, empathy, and compassion because I do feel that when I lean into those qualities, I do my best work, my most challenging, my most delicate, my most difficult and exciting and
probably fulfilling too.
Yeah, most fulfilling work.
Yeah.
I never feel fulfilled when I feel like I'm meeting that bare minimum of like, I feel that I'm not enough, so I need to run an ultra, I need to publish an article. And then you do that, you get it done, you're like, oh yeah, I still feel like I'm not enough. Bummer.
Yeah, I know. And it's so funny because it's so vulnerable and hard to do. And like, as you said, cracking that open, it all goes back to that.
Yeah.
Cracking it open.
And I feel like people would always tell me, like, if you just are your authentic self, like people will love that. Like if you can do, no, they're not. That's a lie. You should still try to be your authentic self. Other people aren't going to like it. That's fine and normal.
Yeah, exactly. Some people won't, but some people will. I think that's also important to maintain is like, be okay with the people who are like, this bitch is crazy, you know, and then also really embrace and appreciate the people who are receptive to it, want to hear more, and not focus on the people who don't. Like, don't try and change yourself for those.
Exactly. And don't expect everyone to like you if you do manage to be your authentic self, which is hard.
It's so hard. And it's hard to maintain. It's work to do all the time, you know.
It's a lot of work.
Because it's like against nature because you know, it's a survival instinct.
Yeah,
so like,
totally. Yeah, to not be bare.
Especially as women.
Yeah.
So last question here. And by the way, I've never gotten the same answer for that question, which I love.
I love that.
I think, and I was, you know, when I went into this, I would expect the same answer. But I haven't gotten it at all.
Everyone's not just like, I work really, really hard and I have a trust fund.
I know, exactly. Everyone's like, I am just creative, or like, you know, it's cool. But what is something that you are proud of that you wouldn't have told anyone else? Like TJ might know, but I wouldn't know. The trail running world as a whole wouldn't know. Maybe your parents don't even know.
Yeah. I have grown a lot. I've become more mature in that I've gotten better at listening. Like I used to be very like, and again, I was rewarded for being like super opinionated, mouthy, like takes no prisoners and earlier in my career. And I think that becoming softer and becoming a better listener. And that's been hard for me to say and to be proud of, because it means admitting that I wasn't always a good listener and that I did what I think people thought was really good work in my bad listener days. And I'm moving towards being a better listener.
That's huge. And again, in line with the theme of this podcast. Yeah. Because it shows that, like, you know, I hope people who listen to this whole thing, because early on the
good listeners made it.
Yeah,
they got rewarded with that nugget.
Exactly. Because at the beginning that we were talking about how so much of it, some of the problems that we as women face and that, you know, society as a whole faces is just not listening, you know, being defensive first, and not being in that vulnerable state of like, oh, please don't do this anymore, which sucks to hear. So that's a really cool way to tie up this podcast.
Yeah, I'm proud of being a better listener. And I hope I continue to be. I hope that like in 5 years because you've interviewed everyone on this podcast and it's like wildly successful, when we get back together to celebrate your 1 millionth download, that I get to be like, you know, I was actually still a bad listener back then. Now I'm a good listener.
Yeah, and then 5 years after that too.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's the thing, though, that's about this podcast that I was realizing in this. I don't talk about the things that I need to work on, so hopefully I evolve too.
Yeah, what's I'd love to know what yours is.
I think something that I'm super proud of in the last 6 months is being more vulnerable. I have, you know, outwardly to the community, people think I'm very vulnerable because I say like, oh, this is hard, but that's easy to do. Like, obviously the ups and downs of ultra running are hard. Yeah. But in my relationships, I've always been someone that's not told anyone when I've really been hurting. And that's not how you curate real friendships. No. You know, I've been there for my friends and I haven't let my friends be there for me. And in my relationships, I've been there for my people, but haven't let the people be there for me. Because it's really scary to be like, I am hurting. Like, I need help. And I've gotten a lot better at doing that. And I attribute all of that to Carson's patience. Shout out.
Yay for patient partners.
Yeah, I know, because I need it, because I will stubbornly bulldoze through life, and I would be like a 50-year-old Ohio dad with like a bunch of suppressed feelings, you know?
Yeah. Just like watching 8 hours of YouTube, yelling at the TV.
I know.
Yep.
10 Bud Lights deep,
Yes,
you know?
same. Yeah, same page.
So
we're all like one little atomic swerve away from that at all times.
I know. So it takes like good patient partners and like safe places. You know, I was like I always was convinced that I couldn't share what I was really feeling. So that's been a really big thing for me in the last 6 months. And I realize every single time I do it, I'm like, oh my God, this is why people share and like let people help. I feel so much better.
Yeah, like life hack, be vulnerable. Like
I know.
It's one of those things when you finally get there, you're like, I see what all the hullabaloo was about.
And it's hard every single time.
Yeah, it's
really,
very brave. And I think that it's so hard to, especially when you value yourself as a helper and as a strong person and as a brave person, it takes a lot of courage to admit to being afraid, to admit to needing help, to admit to like, to wanting things.
Yeah, to wanting things, like even small things, like needing a hug. Like that's where I started, you know? And that was scary. Yeah. You know?
Asking for things, hard.
Yeah. Tough. Well, this was super fun, Zoe. Thanks so much.
So great, Kat.
All right. High five.
Woo.
Hell yeah. I started doing that.